You're listening to From Stillness, an audiobook for a mind in need of quiet. You ever notice how your mind can feel like a crowded room even when you're completely alone? You're lying in bed or sitting on the train, and your brain suddenly launches into 5 different conversations at once, replaying something awkward you said last week, planning your entire future in 90 seconds, adding eggs to the mental grocery list, questioning your life purpose, and remembering that one embarrassing moment from years ago. For no clear reason at all. It's chaos. But it's familiar. We've become so used to this constant background chatter that silence, real, uninterrupted mental silence, feels almost wrong. Like we're slacking off. Like we're missing something. Like our worth is tied to how busy our minds are. But here's the truth. Most people never say out loud. You're not broken for wanting peace. You're not lazy for needing stillness. You're just tired. Tired of living entirely in your head. Thinking is a powerful tool. But it was never meant to run all the time. Carry it too long, and it becomes a burden. Keep it sharp and spinning endlessly, and eventually it starts cutting into you. Most of us aren't even solving anything when we're deep in thought. We're looping. We're rehearsing. We're arguing with people who aren't there. And all of it is quietly draining our energy, our presence, our joy. Your mind wasn't meant to be a stage for every possible scenario. It was meant to be a space where clarity arises, not where chaos lives. And sometimes, the most intelligent thing you can do is to stop thinking for a moment and simply let yourself be. We live in a world that glorifies noise, not just external noise, the kind that comes from notifications, traffic, conversation, and headlines, but internal noise too. Thought loops, mental to-do lists, worries disguised as productivity. We've been taught that a busy mind is a sharp mind, that if your brain isn't running at full speed, you're falling behind. So we keep thinking, even when we're tired, even when there's nothing left to solve, even when all that thinking is just repetition, old fears dressed in new costumes. We've normalized the kind of inner chaos that would have once felt unbearable. Now it's just called being driven, ambitious, responsible. But here's the truth. Constant mental activity is not the same as clarity. And exhaustion isn't a badge of honor. Somewhere along the way, we stopped valuing stillness. We began to treat silence like a void to be filled, instead of a space to return to. And the cost? We've lost touch with our own depth. We don't realize how loud it's become inside our heads, because it's been like that for so long. Like background static we've grown numb to. But just because something feels normal doesn't mean it's healthy. We weren't designed to think without pause. And when we do, we begin to live entirely in the mind, not in the moment. We stop listening to our body. We miss the subtle shifts of our emotions. We move through life reacting, narrating, anticipating, but rarely being. You're not supposed to feel exhausted just from existing. And if you do, it might not be life that's overwhelming you. It might just be the constant noise you've mistaken for necessary. Most of us assume that if we're thinking, we must be making progress. That the more time we spend inside our heads, the closer we are to solving something. But if you look closely, you'll notice that much of what your mind returns to isn't new. It's familiar. Recycled. Looped. The same argument you've had in your head 10 times. The same worry that keeps reappearing in different forms. The same imaginary scenarios where you try to control how others see you, how the future unfolds, how the past could have gone differently. It feels like thinking. But it's really just rehearsing. And the more you engage with these loops, the deeper the groove becomes. It's not clarity you're building, it's momentum for the wrong kind of mental movement. Because not every thought deserves your attention. Not every mental problem needs to be solved. Some are echoes, fragments of old fears that don't belong to the present moment. Some are habits, emotional reflexes that trigger without cause. We confuse activity with insight. But there's a difference between thinking through something and simply spinning inside it. And the more you practice being aware of that difference, the more energy you reclaim. Energy you've been unknowingly pouring into dead-end loops, into mental noise that never leads to action, healing, or understanding. You don't need to force the thoughts to stop. You only need to notice when you're no longer actually thinking, you're just replaying. And that awareness, that gentle noticing, that's the beginning of freedom. Silence has a strange reputation in the modern world. We treat it like absence, like something is missing, as if the moment isn't complete unless it's filled with conversation, notifications, or at the very least a stream of internal commentary. And when that commentary goes quiet, even for a second, we often panic, reaching for a distraction, a sound, a thought, anything to avoid the stillness. But silence isn't emptiness, it's spaciousness. And that's a very different thing. Stillness isn't about doing nothing. It's about not adding anything unnecessary. It's the space beneath the noise, the quiet ground where clarity begins to take shape. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped interrupting it. True awareness doesn't need to shout. It doesn't arrive through analysis or overthinking. It comes in the pause, that moment between thoughts when you're no longer solving, controlling, or narrating your experience. And in that pause, something shifts. You notice your breath. You feel the texture of the moment. You start to be instead of think about being. That's what most people miss. Silence isn't passive. It's profoundly active, just in a subtler, deeper way. It's the doorway through which your deeper intelligence can speak. The part of you that doesn't use words, but knows exactly what matters. And the more time you spend in that space, not running from silence but resting in it, the more you realize stillness isn't a break from life. It's the part of life where truth finally has room to arrive. You can be standing in the sun, surrounded by beauty, and still be trapped in a storm that no one else can see. Because the mind doesn't need reality to feel real. It just needs your attention. And most of the time, your attention isn't here, it's somewhere else entirely. Maybe it's in a conversation from 3 days ago, the one you keep rewriting in your head. Maybe it's in a fear about next week, next month, next year. Maybe it's in a version of yourself you think you should be by now, but aren't. And meanwhile, life is still happening. Right here. Right now. But you're missing it, not because you want to, but because your thoughts keep dragging you somewhere else. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference. If your mind is reliving conflict, your body still tenses. If your mind is projecting failure, your chest still tightens. You could be walking through a peaceful park, but internally, you're in battle. That's the cost of living in the mind instead of the moment. And this isn't about being mindful all the time. It's about remembering that you have a mind, but you're not meant to live inside it constantly. Sometimes the greatest act of self-care is simply bringing your attention back to where your feet are, to what your body is sensing, to what this exact moment is offering, without asking it to be anything else. Because you cannot fully experience life from inside a simulation. You have to come back, gently, again and again, to what's actually here. And when you do, even for just a few seconds, you start to remember what it feels like to be truly alive. There's a subtle but powerful difference between thinking and being aware. Most of us blur the two. We assume that if our minds are active, we must be present. But mental activity isn't the same as awareness. In fact, it often distracts us from it. Thoughts arise like reflexes. You see a facial expression, you assume they're judging you. You remember a task, you immediately feel behind. You feel discomfort, your mind starts looking for something to fix. These are not conscious choices. They're conditioned responses. Mental habits built over time, often without our awareness. But real awareness is different. It doesn't react, it notices. It creates space between the trigger and the response. It gives you a moment to ask, is this thought helpful? Is it even true? You don't have to believe every thought you think. You don't have to follow every mental thread just because it showed up. Some thoughts are just noise. Some are old scripts. Some are echoes of fear, doubt, or insecurity that no longer belong to your present life. And when you begin to recognize that, something shifts. You stop being dragged by every passing thought. You stop reacting automatically. You start responding with presence, with clarity, with choice. That's the difference. Thinking is a stream you can easily get swept away in. Awareness is the ability to step back and see the river clearly. And the more you practice that step back, not with judgment but with gentle noticing, the more peaceful your inner world becomes. Because you realize You are not your thoughts. You are the space they pass through. We've been taught to fear silence, to fill it, to explain it, to treat it as something empty, something lacking, something to be avoided. But silence is not absence. It's presence, without pressure. It's the gentle return to what's real, once the noise has fallen away. In a world that rewards constant doing, thinking, and expressing, stillness can feel suspicious. If you're not busy, are you falling behind? If you're not posting, are you being forgotten? If your mind is quiet, are you doing something wrong? But here's the truth, silence is not what's missing. It's what we've been missing. Because within silence is space. And within that space is healing, the kind that doesn't need words or plans or analysis to work. It just needs your willingness to stay, to not run from the quiet, to not fill the gap out of habit. Silence is where your body exhales without being told. It's where your nervous system softens. It's where the truth of how you really feel rises to the surface, gently, without force. And sometimes that truth is grief. Sometimes it's clarity. Sometimes it's the simple realization that you've been carrying tension you didn't even know was there. But whatever it is, it only arrives when there's enough stillness for it to land. You don't need to chase silence to heal. You only need to stop fearing it. Because the quiet is not your enemy. It's your mirror. And it reflects back everything you've been too distracted to notice. And in that noticing, the healing begins. We've been taught that clarity comes from control. That if we can just think hard enough, plan well enough, prepare for every possibility, we'll finally feel secure. But have you noticed? The more you try to mentally manage every outcome, the more anxious you become. The more you try to force insight through thinking, the further it seems to slip away. Because control is rooted in fear, in the belief that if you don't grip everything tightly, it will all fall apart. But the most powerful moments in your life, the clearest decisions, the most meaningful shifts, likely didn't come from control. They came from stillness, from surrender, from the moment you finally stopped trying to figure everything out and simply felt what was true. Not because you calculated it, but because you recognized it. That's the paradox. You don't access your deepest wisdom by thinking harder. You access it by getting quiet enough to hear what's been there all along. And that doesn't mean you abandon thought or preparation. It means you stop worshiping them as the only path to knowing. Some truths live beyond analysis. Some decisions don't need a pros and cons list. They need space and trust. The kind of trust that says, I don't need to control everything to respond wisely. I don't need to overthink to honor what feels right. I can act from a deeper intelligence, not panic, not pressure, but presence. Because real clarity isn't something you force, it's what rises when you finally allow the noise to fall. We've been conditioned to believe that intelligence always looks like quick answers, fast logic, sharp comebacks. That the smartest mind is the one that moves the fastest, speaks the most, calculates the farthest. But there's another kind of intelligence, quieter, slower, and often overlooked. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't rush to fill the silence. It doesn't need to prove itself. It watches. It listens. It waits. This kind of intelligence isn't about having all the answers. It's about sensing what questions actually matter. It's not about thinking louder. It's about seeing more clearly. Because observation is a form of wisdom. And presence, when fully embodied, becomes a kind of clarity that no amount of overthinking can reach. The people who carry this kind of presence, the ones who walk into a room and immediately shift the energy, they're not radiating pressure. They're radiating groundedness. Not because they know everything, but because they've learned how to listen. They know that not everything needs a conclusion. Not every situation requires a mental strategy. Some things resolve themselves if you give them enough space. And here's the shift. You don't need to always be the thinker. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is observe without reacting, to feel without explaining, to respond when it's time, and not a moment sooner. Because real intelligence doesn't live in the performance of thought. It lives in the quiet confidence of awareness. And the more you return to that still place inside, the place that doesn't chase but simply sees, the more your wisdom stops needing words. There's something quietly powerful about realizing you don't have to think your way through every moment of your life. We've spent so long believing that constant mental activity is the same as self-awareness, that the more we analyze, plan, and problem solve, the more prepared we'll be. But the truth is, overthinking often doesn't bring clarity. It just brings exhaustion. You weren't meant to live entirely in your head. You were meant to experience life with your whole being, your breath, your senses, your presence. And when you allow yourself to stop narrating every moment, stop mentally chasing outcomes, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel your way through life again. You listen better. You speak with more care. You respond instead of reacting. Some of your wisest decisions won't come from a list of pros and cons. They'll come from a quiet knowing. The kind of knowing that rises when you finally stop interrupting yourself. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you've become still enough to hear what's been true all along. You don't need to abandon thinking altogether, just stop treating it as your only way of knowing. Because your awareness goes deeper than your thoughts. And your peace isn't hiding in the next mental breakthrough. It's already here, underneath the noise. So next time you find yourself stuck in mental overdrive, ask gently, what if this moment doesn't need to be solved? What if it just needs to be lived? Sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is to stop thinking and start listening.